Hello, today I will be making a Mexican meatball soup that my mom would make. It was pretty simple. It's different than most of the meatball soups that I've had from different places. So my mom was unique in that she used little bits of carrots that were pickled and the jalapenos. And she would take ground meat and finely chopped onion, some little pieces of tomato and carrot. She would add mint flakes to the meatballs. I put a little basil and a little parsley in addition to the mint leaves. It sounds different, but it makes a whole new flavor with the meat, and it doesn't taste minty, it just tastes really good. I will put some oregano, and then I will put a bay leaf on top of the soup. So I'm gonna need some rice and an egg, meat, and if you have stock, I use both chicken stock, and then of course this meat, when it cooks, it's gonna make its own beef stock. It tastes pretty good. So I understand that my mother used to use the pickled carrots instead of unflavored meat tenderizer in the meatballs. So the vinegar will go out into the, be absorbed by the meat, and it will get softer. It also adds a flavor. Now I'm not pouring the juice in the meatballs as much as I'm using the carrots with the tomatoes and onions. And that jalapeno flavor is not really noticeable in the soup at all. It's just a different kind of flavor that I notice in it, and it softens the meatballs a bit. So I don't add any unseasoned meat tenderizer. So in my meatballs, I'm adding the meat to the onion and carrots. And I'm gonna add some spices in there, the mint leaves, some oregano, a little basil, and some parsley, and a little salt and pepper, and one egg, and then I'll add the rice and make these into probably meatballs that fit inside my hand, and then I'll drop them slowly into the boiling stock water. This doesn't take a whole lot of time. And what I've done before, I have frozen meatballs that were prepared that were raw so that I could cook them another time at another date. Also, you know, if you have leftover things, I will take my canned tomatoes or some of this mixture of carrots with tomatoes and onions, and I will put them in the small containers to freeze. So I'm going to be sharing with neighbors and friends, so I'm going to be making a good-sized bundle of this. So my mom used to make this for a family of 6, and have enough to have leftovers and share with people. This is a great thing to do in the fall when it's getting chilly. You have that chill in the air. And it was one of the things that she would make for us as little kids. Sometimes we didn't feel very hungry. You know, we were maybe as an alternative to chicken soup, instead of having chicken all the time. Sometimes she would make this meatball soup, which we kids really loved. I'm not afraid to add quite a bit of mint leaves. So I add about 4 or 5 tablespoons of mint leaves, even more, 1/4 of a bottle or so. Then I add a bit of parsley, and I do have some basil in there. Salt and pepper, the pickled carrots are in there, and some tomato. So I'm going to be adding more as necessary and making these into meatballs after I add my egg and some rice. So right now I'm just distributing the spices all over the meatballs. So my mom used to use chicken stock. You can use chicken bouillon, and you could also add some beef bouillon in there if you like. So I have my stock that's boiling. It's coming to a boil slowly. And again, I have chicken stock in there. You can add a little beef bouillon if you like. Beef bouillon is good in that. And if you don't have chicken stock, you can always use chicken flavored bouillon. Remember, bouillon has some salt in it, so you want to be careful about how much salt you add. So in the pot, I'm making sure that it comes to a rolling boil. And I have 2 pots that I'm doing this Albondiga soup in, which is meatball soup. And I've used about 6 tablespoons of the mint leaves, 4 of the parsley, and 2 tablespoons of the basil. I've used 2 eggs in here, and I've used about 3/4 of a cup of rice that I have this in this mixture distributed. I have probably about half an onion and almost half a cup of the carrots and diced tomatoes. So if I find any big pieces of onion, I like to cut them smaller. Just want to make the meatballs, make sure that they hold their shape and that they fit in my hand. So this is about the time when I would be adding the meatballs in. And as the meatballs will cook, they will be releasing some good fat on top, and they will be floating to the top. So that's one of the good things about cooking this, is that I like to use a spoon, a big spoon, and take off any of the brown floating debris, the fat. I'm not a fan of extra fat in my food. That's why I use leaner meats. So for me, I did add a little bit of the jalapeno juice in my meat just to make the meatballs more tenderized, softer. So I'm just definitely just going through the meatballs and making sure that they're holding their shapes together, and then dropping them in one by one, slowly. Some people put them in giant spoons and gently ladle them in. It's whatever makes you happy. This is something that my mom made when we had colds and didn't feel good in the winter, back in the 70s and 60s actually. So there's like 1 clove of garlic in each pot. Not very much garlic in here. It was something simple for us kids. And it would help stimulate our appetite when we didn't feel very good or we had colds or anything going on. So these meatballs take probably about 20-25 minutes to cook, but I'd like the whole thing to boil a good 30 minutes after I put in the last meatball. And you can see some of the brown fat that rises to the top, and I'll be scooping some of that off. When I put in the bay leaf was the last thing I put in, and I always crack the bay leaf and poke holes through the middle. It stays intact, but it releases more of the flavors, the oils and everything. So I'm gonna do 1 pot, get probably, I think I can get a dozen small meatballs. And then if I need to make additional batches of the meat mixture, I will while I have everything out. But it smells really good in here. That's a smell that I remember at my mom's home when I was a little kid. Probably she learned that from her mother or her mother-in-law, my other grandma. I'm not sure which one taught her this recipe, but no doubt because they grew up in Mexico, that was something that she was able to make. So when I have these cooking for 30 minutes after I put in the last meatball, hopefully then company will be showing up. And I serve this in a bowl with some cilantro. Sometimes some of us used to put lemon slices and squeeze in a little lemon, and corn tortillas. But when we were little, we definitely liked this with corn tortillas. And again, usually we did this in the winter. We had colds, so we would eat some of the small hot peppers that my mother grew in the garden. And it would help clear out our sinuses. That was a pretty good way to eat hot peppers with a soup and corn tortillas. And if she felt like it, she might cut a couple of pieces of avocado into the soup after she served it in the bowl. So that's probably what I'll be doing here. Okay, so the other pot is about ready. See, it's got a good rolling boil. So then I'll be adding more. Oh, I think I've lost count. So I think I have a dozen or so in this pot. And when they're done, they'll be floating to the top. They'll be spinning around, and sometimes the flavors, you know, from the onion and the tomato and the pickled carrots will mingle in there, along with all the flavors, oregano, a lot of mint leaves. And I know that sounds strange. I couldn't believe it when my mother showed me that she put mint leaves in there. I was so surprised because this soup doesn't taste like mint leaves. It makes a new flavor and a new smell when it's combined with all the other ingredients. I thought that was pretty cool. And yes, if you have leftovers, do what I do. If you have leftovers, I freeze them. I put them in some of the soup in some of the containers, and I'll put, after they cool, I'll put some saran wrap on top, and then I'll put the lid on. And then I'll save it for another day where maybe I feel too tired to cook, or it's gotten really cold. And I want something that is a comfort food. And again, this was definitely a comfort food for us when we were growing up. So, got a good rolling boil now. I'm going to try to scoop up some of this brown stuff. And I'll just put it in my little cup. And the other one is going pretty good too. See all the stuff that's floating to the top? I'll take off what I can and get rid of that yucky stuff. Yuck. So, yeah, when we were little, we were pretty string bean skinny. We had soups that had just a little bit of meat in them. We always had vegetables. Even if we had, no matter what we had, we always had some kind of beans. And sometimes we'd have rice or some kind of fideuà or some type of pasta that was cooked with tomato and onion and some olive oil. Yep, this is a different time. I remember back then they didn't have a detangler for the hair. My mom used to put olive oil in my hair. She thought it was good for everything. I think she had an Italian grandma in there somewhere. Oh yeah, I even have a piece of chicken from because I did use chicken stock. So this is a really great smell in the house right now. Oh my goodness, it smells just wonderful. So again, just the way I do it, make sure I don't forget everything's cooked. About 30 minutes after the last meatball is when I figure that it'll be done. And yes, I see the meatballs kind of spinning around, and there's rice in there. I did use some rice, probably the additional rice, so that I can put it into the soup. So the rice will be cooked. The meatballs will be just right. I remember for the smaller kids, when we were small, she'd make small meatballs. And then for my dad, she'd have the larger ones. He was always working. My mom was always working at home. So now that I'm retired, I can share some of the recipes that I like to cook. Again, I'm taking some of this fat away, just like my mom did. A lot of slippery fat in there. And yes, I know some of the oils from some of the spices are in there too. So I'm not getting all 100% of the fat in, but I am getting anything that is obviously a dark brown. But this is a moving soup. So when it's time to serve, I have some heated tortillas. I want jalapeno slices and a wedge of lemon in mine. And I'm going to cut up an avocado to put an avocado in there. My mom didn't always do the avocado. That was something she did for the grown-ups because we kids didn't really, believe it or not, we didn't like avocado when we were young. There's a lot of things I didn't like. I didn't like pickles. I didn't like avocados. But anyway, and if I do have some left over, then I will store some away in a plastic container. After it cools, I'll put it in a plastic container, ladle it in there, and then I'll cover it with saran wrap, and then I'll put the lid on. And then I like to write a date on my containers. But this is the gist of it. So now I'm just waiting for a company to show up so we can ladle it out in the bowls. And I hope you try this recipe. And I guess I should show a picture one more time of what I used in here, just to help you. Buen provecho.